So here's the irony of 2026 in one sentence. Donald Trump slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian-built cars to protect American jobs. And the big three responded by shrinking their footprint in Canada, losing ground at home, and watching other countries move into the space that they walked out of.
He didn't protect the North American auto industry. He just lit a bonfire under it and then yelled at everyone else for running towards the exits.
So today, we're talking about how Trump's tariffs are backfiring, how the Detroit Three are slowly ghosting Canada, and how the Liberal government is out here signing deals with Japan, South Korea, and China that make it very clear we're not waiting around for Washington to calm down. So let's start with the basics, because we need this. Back in 2016, Ford, GM, and Stellantis built about 56% of all the vehicles made in Canada. Now, they're down to 23%, less than a quarter. Meanwhile, Toyota and Honda have gone from 44% to 77% of Canadian production.
And before anyone in the US starts saying, good, let those jobs leave Canada and come home, here's the problem. That's not how modern auto works. This is one integrated supply chain. Engines, transmissions, wiring harnesses, steel, software, they cross the border over and over before a vehicle even hits the showroom.
When a plant in Ingersoll or Oshawa or Brampton goes dark, it isn't just Canadians losing paychecks. The parts plants in Michigan and Ohio lose orders. The U.S. logistics companies lose contracts. The American steel mills and plastics factories see less demand. You can't amputate half of the production chain without the pain showing up on both sides.
GM shutting the BrightDrop plant in Ingersoll, it doesn't just hurt that town. It wipes out demand for US-made components that flowed into those vans. Stellantis pausing retooling in Brampton doesn't just hit Ontario. It means the stamping plant in the States that was supposed to feed that line suddenly has nothing to stamp.
And then you add Trump's tariffs on top of that. Canadian-built vehicles going into the U.S. now carry that 25% tariff on the non-U.S. content. That makes those cars more expensive in American showrooms, which means fewer sales, which means less work for American workers who make the U.S. parts inside those same vehicles.
So when Trump says he's protecting American jobs by punishing Canada plants, well, what he's really doing is kneecapping a system where a car can cross the border 6 or 7 times before it's finished. He's attacking the pipeline that keeps Americans in auto parts jobs, in logistics jobs, in supplier jobs.
And just in case anyone thinks this is just Canada complaining, listen to what Ford's own CEO is saying. Trump went to that Ford plant and called the USMCA trade deal irrelevant, and he bragged that he could take it or leave it. A few hours later, Jim Farley had to clean it up and said a North America free trade deal is critical for the industry. His words, "We really see Canada and Mexico and the US as an integrated manufacturing system. Very critical for us."
That's not a Canadian talking point. That's the guy running Ford basically saying, if you blow up the deal with Canada and Mexico, you're not just hurting them, you're punching holes in your own industry.
Meanwhile, the Japanese automakers that Trump loves to grumble about, well, those are the companies keeping plants running in Alliston, Cambridge, and Woodstock. They lean into the integrated model instead of blowing it up for a soundbite.
Because they actually believe in long-term planning. They're not just chasing quarterly stock pops just or throwing a tantrum every time a president wants a headline. They look at Canada and say, hey, they've got skilled workers, stable rule of law, access to the U.S. market when Washington isn't melting down. I think we can work with this.
So when Trump brags that tariffs are bringing the auto industry home, what's really happening is this. The old American branch plant model is shrinking in Canada. Japan has quietly taken the lead here, and we're now signing deals with new partners to fill the gaps that Detroit left behind.
That's the story in the numbers. Now let's talk about one of those new partners, South Korea. While Trump is yelling at clouds, South Korea is sending ministers, signing memorandums of understanding, laying the groundwork for plants and batteries, and setting up a pipeline for real investment.
Canada and South Korea signed an MOU that does a very important thing. It sets up a Canada-Korea Industrial Cooperation Forum focused on future mobility. That means EVs, batteries, hydrogen vehicles, AI, the whole next-generation auto ecosystem. And it explicitly talks about building a Korean automotive industrial footprint in Canada and growing their battery manufacturing presence here.
That means they're not just shipping cars to us. They want plants, battery facilities, mineral processing, R&D. From mines to motors, they want to plug into Canada's entire value chain.
And that's the point. The money is in processing and manufacturing, not just extraction. And that's exactly what this MOU was aimed at.
Because exporting raw materials is rent. Building the supply chain, that's ownership.
Our industry minister, Melanie Joly, spelled it out perfectly. This isn't charity. It's about using our critical minerals, our skilled labor, and existing auto base to become a hub for the next generation of vehicle manufacturing. She's talking about good jobs, battery production, and using our resources to build a more resilient auto sector, not just begging Detroit to keep a couple of lines open.
And then you've got our Energy and Natural Resources Minister talking about how this tightens our energy security and critical mineral strategy with a trusted partner in Asia. So while Trump swings tariffs like he swings a golf club, Canada is building alliances around actual strategy.
And the numbers, they really matter. In 2024, about 12% of all vehicles sold in Canada were made by South Korean automakers. And Korean companies have already sunk billions of dollars into Canada's emerging battery ecosystem. LG Energy Solution, POSCO, EcoPro, Volta, and more. This new deal is basically Ottawa saying, okay, you believed in us, now we lock it in and scale it up.
That's the part that drives Washington crazy. They're used to Canada begging for access. Now we're signing deals that say, if you want access to us, to our minerals, to our workers, our market, you need to bring investment, not threats.
And then there's the big one, China and those EVs. This is where Trump's tariffs backfire in the loudest way possible.
Yeah, 2 years ago, we followed the US and slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs because that's what the US wanted. They wanted to cut China off and keep North America as one big protected playground for legacy automakers.
Except that wall didn't just keep China out. It also strangled competition, drove up prices, and helped those same automakers drag their feet on EVs while hoovering up all those billions of dollars in subsidies.
Then Mark Carney went to Beijing and did something Trump did not expect. He cut a deal that dropped that tariff back down to 6.1%, the old MFN rate. And he tied it to a quota of 49,000 Chinese EVs a year, scaling up to about 70,000 over 5 years. And in return, China slashed its own brutal tariffs on Canadian canola and other exports.
And that's not just an auto story. That's farmers, fishers, and small towns suddenly getting access back to a giant market because Canada stopped letting U.S. politics dictate our trade policy.
U.S. trade officials, they're furious. Automaker CEOs are calling it a slippery slope. They're terrified that once Canada proves that you can do business with China and still protect your own interests, other countries are going to start asking, why are we still chained to Washington's hard line?
Meanwhile, Canadian consumers are looking at the math. On one side, overpriced trucks and SUVs that guzzle gas and come with a tariff drama surcharge. On the other side, a wave of smaller, cheaper EVs from China that could finally put an electric car in reach for normal families.
And Carney is trying to do something smarter than just opening the floodgates. The quota forces at least half of those 49,000 EVs to be under $35,000 by 2030. That keeps pressure on the market to deliver genuinely affordable vehicles, not just luxury toys and silver paint.
Plus, part of the strategy is to use that access as bait for joint ventures. You want to sell your EVs in Canada? Great. Build batteries here, build components here, do research here, work with our miners, our engineers, and our grid.
So again, what happens to Trump's grand tariff plan? Well, in the US, he's still blocking Chinese EVs and calling himself a protector of American industry. In Canada, his tariffs slew a hole in the old business model, and Carney used that shot to say, fine, we'll build something new, and we'll do it with partners who actually want to work with us.
Detroit ends up squeezed from both sides. They've got a president in Washington who thinks tariffs are the answer to everything, and a prime minister in Ottawa who's quietly turning Canada into the place where Japanese, Korean, and potentially Chinese manufacturers all meet the future.
So let's step back and ask the simple question. If Trump's tariffs were working, what would we be seeing?
Well, we'd see thriving American automakers, confident investors, stable supply chains, and Canada groveling to stay inside that U.S. tent.
Well, what are we actually seeing?
Well, we actually see the U.S. automakers slashing jobs in Ontario and complaining that tariffs are costing them billions. We see Japanese automakers quietly dominating Canadian production because they don't want their supply chains at the mercy of any one politician. We also see South Korea signing deals to build plants and batteries in Canada. And you see Chinese EVs entering our market under capped, controlled deals that lower tariffs for both cars and Canadian exports.
Sounds pretty good to me. And that is not America first. That is America boxed itself in and Canada walked right around that box.
So when Brendan Sweeney from Trillium says that this shift has been 25 years in the making, he's basically warning Ottawa, stop pretending that the old model is coming back. Reward the companies, Japanese, Korean, whoever, that actually build and invest here. If you want to sell into Canada, don't treat us like a branch plant. Treat us like a partner.
And that's where Trump has completely misread the moment. Tariffs used to work when the U.S. was the only game in town. In 2026, when you've got global EV makers, multiple battery supply chains, and countries like South Korea, Japan, and China ready to do long-term deals, tariffs just give your competitors permission to look elsewhere.
Canada's lesson, sure, it's been brutal, but it's also been very clear. We've lost jobs, we've lost plants, we've seen real communities suffer. But instead of doubling down on begging the big three to love us again, the Carney government is finally doing what should have been done years ago. Diversify or die.
So where does that leave Canada? Are we just collateral damage in Trump's trade war? Or do we actually have a path forward?
Well, I think it's both. We are collateral damage and we have a path because we're still an auto nation. This industry contributes roughly $16 to $17 billion to our GDP and supports more than 500,000 jobs when you count the full supply chain. The question is whether those jobs are anchored to one fragile relationship with one volatile White House or spread across a web of partners who actually believe in long-term investment.
Japan staying, Korea arriving with plants and batteries, China opening its markets to our canola and seafood, while we cautiously open our markets to their EVs. Europe already is deepening ties with us on critical minerals and clean tech. So Trump can scream about loyalty all he wants. The reality is, we're past the point where one neighbor gets to dictate what we drive and who we sell to.
Tariffs were supposed to force Canada back into line. Instead, they finally forced us to grow up economically. We're not just the backyard for Detroit anymore. We're the meeting point for Tokyo, Seoul, Beijing, Berlin, and whoever else is serious about building the next generation of vehicles here, with our workers, our minerals, and our rules.
So the next time you hear Trump boasting that he took on Canada with tariffs, remember this: the big three are shrinking here, Japanese plants are humming, Koreans are setting up shop, Chinese EVs are coming in under a deal that also rescues our farmers and fishermen, and Mark Carney's message to the world is basically, if you want a stable partner in a very unstable decade, we're right here.
Trump's tariffs didn't teach Canada a lesson. They actually taught us a truth. If you let one country hold your economy hostage, that's not partnership. That's risk. And we're finally acting like a country that understands that.
So what do you think? Are we doing enough to turn this auto mess into an actual opportunity, or are we still hanging on to the past for far too long? Let us know in the comments. Would you buy a cheaper Korean or Chinese EV if it meant more competition, more jobs here, and less power for the politicians?
I know I certainly would. And remember, if you want a sanity check from north of the noise here, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss our next video.
And make sure to share this one because somebody in your feed, I'm sure, still thinks that tariffs are an economic plan. And if you want to support this channel, join the A-Team and make sure to subscribe to our Substack where we do deep dives.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Ciao for now.